Welcome back, America, to Sound Retirement Radio, where we bring you concepts, ideas, and strategies designed to help you achieve clarity, confidence, and freedom as you prepare for and transition through retirement. And now, here is your host, Jason Parker.
America, welcome back to another round of Sound Retirement Radio. So glad to have you tune in to episode number 392. I think you're going to love this episode. The title is my interview with Fritz Gilbert from the Retirement Manifesto. But before we get started, I like to get the day started right two ways. The first one is by renewing our mind, and I've got a verse here, actually two verses from 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 and 7. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. And then, of course, something fun. Why did the ghost go into the bar? For the booze. Boo. What's in a ghost's nose? Boogers. As a quick reminder, my new book is available on Amazon. The title of the book is Retirement Calculator, How Much Money Do I Need to Retire? And here's a recent 5-star review. I highly recommend for DIY. For several years, I have listened to Jason's podcast, Sound Retirement Planning, and used the Retirement Budget Calculator. Both are excellent. Retirement Calculator is a super easy to follow book with a wealth of practical information on financial planning. I am a certified financial planner and wholeheartedly recommend this book. From Gordon. Thanks so much for the 5-star review, Gordon. In 2015, Fritz Gilbert had just started his blog called The Retirement Manifesto, and at that time, he was sharing our podcasts on Facebook. I reached out to him to see if he wanted to share his story on Sound Retirement Radio, and I'll post this original interview in the show notes if you want to take a trip back in time and listen to Fritz talk about his journey towards retirement as he was just getting started with his blog. Since then, Fritz has written a popular book called Keys to a Successful Retirement, and he continues to write and publish articles on his very popular blog and to tell his story and to share his journey into and through retirement. So it was my good fortune to reconnect with Fritz, and I'm sure you're going to love this interview. Remember that articles, links, and resources are available at soundretirementplanning.com. Just click on episode 392. And specifically, you're going to want to check out this video that Fritz made on how to build an insulated doghouse. You can also check out the nonprofit that he and his wife started called Freedom for Fido. And I'll include a link to that original interview. So if you want to listen to him back in 2015, you can do that. Also, I'll have a link on there to his book, Keys to a Successful Retirement. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Fritz Gilbert. It's my good fortune to have Fritz Gilbert back on the program from the Retirement Manifesto. Fritz, welcome back to Sound Retirement Radio.
Jason, it's hard to believe it's been 7 years since we talked last. I appreciate you having me back on. It's great to catch up with you.
2015 was when you and I first connected. I think you had been sharing some of our work on Facebook, and I think you had just started Retirement Manifesto, correct?
That's correct. I started it in April of 15, and we talked in the fall, I believe. So it was probably 6 months in. It's amazing how far we've both come since.
And now you're retired. I am. You're a very successful author, blogger, podcaster. You're all over the place with the Retirement Manifesto.
You know, it's funny because when we first talked, I was really just starting the blog as kind of a, hey, is this going to go anywhere? It was one of the things I write about in the book is just try as many things that you're interested in, and some things will stick. And it's amazing now, looking back 7 years, you know, it's really turned into something that I just do because I enjoy it. But I think when you really enjoy something, it has a better chance of being real and authentic, and it resonates with people. And it's, you know, I've got a good audience now. I love the interaction with people, and it's just continued to grow, and I'm having fun with it. So it's purely just a passion project, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, I so appreciate the opportunity. I appreciated that initial interview that we did, and I'm looking forward to this next interview. But so back then, 2015, you were still working. You didn't retire till 2018. So
Yep.
Let's go back in time, because some of our listeners may not have heard that original interview. Let's go back in time and just tell me, 2015, how old were you then? You were thinking about retirement at that point.
Yep, I retired at 55, so I would have been 52 when we did that recording.
52 years old, okay. And 2018, you retired.
Yep.
Any regrets?
55. You know, it's amazing. People have asked me what would I have done differently? Do I have any regrets? You know, different ways of phrasing the same question. And And I'm humble when I say this, but I really struggle to find an answer to that because it has been such a smooth transition for me, and we absolutely love our life up here in the mountains and what retirement has become for us. And I think the lesson I've learned is putting the time into the preparation, especially on the non-financial aspects, it pays back dividends in spades. Mm-hmm. And obviously I was writing about it from 3 years prior to retirement. I was thinking about it every week. I was writing articles, and that forced me to really be intentional in my preparation. And I think because of that, I really struggle to think of anything I would have done differently. It's really gone well for us. So we're very blessed and very thankful.
That's good. Well, I want to talk about the financial side. I want to talk about the non-financial side. But before we get into all that, I just want to talk about where we are in 2022. Rough year in the markets, a lot of fear in the world today. Tell me about your perspective, being retired, having to live and depend on your retirement assets at this phase of life. How is this impacting you?
Yeah, and I think it probably helps. I'm 59 years old now, so I've been through quite a few bear markets, and I've always seen them recover. So I don't have a lot of the fear and anxiety that this thing won't come back. I think the biggest risk as you get into early retirement is the sequence return risk, obviously. And if you have to start taking withdrawals and sell stocks in your portfolio to fund your retirement, that's where the real danger lies. And I appreciated your podcast you did a couple weeks ago on the bucket strategy, because that's what we've used, and I've written about it. Thanks for the link in your notes, by the way. And we've got 3 years of cash. I'm making a little bit of money on the side that I wasn't planning on. I'm on a board of directors, so there's some income coming in that I didn't plan. I've got my pension in place. So with the buffer of cash, sure, you give up potentially some return, but this type of year is exactly why you do it. And I have no anxiety because we've got plenty of cash. I've got patience to ride out the market, and I have no reason to not expect that in 3-4 years time, the market will be back to a more reasonable level. So I'm surprisingly calm about it. And I wrote an article called the 90-10 rule of retirement, which is basically before you retire, 90% of your thinking is about the financials. And after you retire, if you've done it right, only about 10% of your thinking is about the financials. And that's been my case. And I've talked to others who have experienced a similar thing, probably worse this year with the bear market and inflation and everything else going on. But I think very little about our financials. We've set up a paycheck out of our savings. It transfers into our checking every month. We spend what's in there. And I don't really worry about it. It's shocking to me how calm I've been through the bear market.
That's good to hear. When you were preparing for retirement, were you shooting for like the 25 times annual withdrawals from your portfolio?
No, we were a little more conservative. I wrote an article about what is the right safe withdrawal rate to use, and everybody's got to make a personal decision. But fortunately, I was closer to 3%, so 33x your spending. And I worked one more year to get there. I could have retired at age 54. I made a conscious decision to work one more year just to be a little bit safe, be a little conservative. In addition to that, we were a little conservative with our spending estimates. We estimated everything to the high side. We're paying for private insurance as an example, and we estimated $2,500 a month for private insurance. It's come in at about $2,000 a month. So, we were conservative in all of our assumptions. In addition to that, we planned a conservative withdrawal rate. So I think that's probably been a wise move in retrospect, given the inflation and the market performance.
Yeah, talk to me about buckets. There's controversy about buckets. I heard you on Morningstar with Christine Benz interviewing you. She's obviously a proponent of buckets, but you've got other people out there that don't like the bucket strategy, and you decided to set that up for you. So now, as you're in retirement and you're pulling money out of those low risk assets, does that give you a sense of confidence to know that you've got 3 years of cash or low risk investments to pull from?
Oh, it's absolutely, to me, this is exactly why you do it, and the other thing I did, which is a little bit different, is I try to kind of keep my buckets at a full 3 years level almost all the time. So no less than once a quarter, especially because the stock market was doing so great in my first 3 years of retirement. Every quarter I would sell stocks because they were the best performing asset at the time. So I would sell stocks equivalent to what we'd spent over the last 3 months, and I'd put it back into cash for bucket one. So I kept bucket one absolutely full. And I actually did my last stock sale in January of this year, right before the market tanked.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to time the market. It was just that I'd set up this process where I wanted to keep it full. Because if you don't keep it full, let's say you've got 3 years and you say, okay, every December I'll pull it down or I'll refill it. and the market crashes in November, you've just lost a year's worth of protection that you had kind of designed into your system. Mm-hmm. So the one little tweak I made was that more frequent refill. And now that the market's down, I haven't refilled it at all. I'm content to let it draw down. And, spending's a little bit variable. We're not probably spending as much as we would if the market were doing great. We don't feel like we're sacrificing anything, but we didn't take our big RV trip out to your neck of the woods like we did in 15, right? So or 2018. So there are things that you can adjust that don't really feel like you're sacrificing much. And that's just a natural behavior, I think, in a down market.
How many buckets are you using?
We've got 3. We've got the first is cash, second one, and I loved your argument about looking at asset allocation by bucket. I'm not necessarily that sophisticated, but in essence, bucket 1 is cash, bucket 2 is bonds and REITs and things like that are kind of bond-like. And I consider alternative investments in there. I've got some, precious metals and stuff like that, kind of commodity funds, some hopefully counter-cyclical stuff that I kind of consider bucket 2. And then bucket 3 is stock. So I'm roughly, I haven't looked recently with the latest market downturn, but I'm typically running about 60-40.
Cool.
60 stocks.
And is $2,000 a month for health insurance? That's a big expense. Is that your guys' biggest expense every month?
Absolutely. Yeah. We paid for our house. We downsized. Since I've talked to you last, we were still living in Atlanta. We sold the big house in Atlanta and bought a cabin up in the mountains, used the equity from the home to pay cash for the place up here, paid it off. So we're totally debt free. Our cars are paid for. So far and away, our biggest expense is the health insurance, but we knew it would be, and I think as long as you're realistic when you do your cash flow projections, and your calculator is a great tool for that, as long as you're realistic on your spending estimates, it's a big number, but if you build it into the formula, it's not an unexpected number, and it's one you can plan for.
Yeah. Well, anything specific that you find or questions that people have on the financial side before we shift into the non-financial side of things? Are there any questions people generally have for you regarding the finances that you want to make sure we let our listeners know about?
I would say in summary, and you've covered all this, and your content's excellent, and you're a pretty smart guy, obviously. So I don't think there's anything that you haven't told your listeners already. But I think the biggest question I get from people is, how do you know when you have enough? And the basic process of, you've got to everybody looks at their investments and their net worth, and that's relatively easy. The one thing I would encourage people is make sure you spend an equal amount of due diligence on your spending side. Don't just take a swag. Don't just say, it's going to be 80% of my pre-retirement spending. Do some work on it. And one of the things we did after you and I talked last, we tracked our actual spending, which we've never done. We've never budgeted. We've always just saved, pretty aggressively and spent the rest. But we took a year and we tracked every dime we spent, and we built a very solid base case. So here we now know exactly what we're spending pre-retirement. We did this in 2016, I believe. So then we projected what's going to change when we retire. Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier, we planned conservatively. So we estimated high, and we basically modified that current pre-retirement spending into as accurate as possible post-retirement spending. Mm-hmm. And then we inflated it every year. So we had an inflation factor in there out to age 95. And taking that amount of diligence on the spending side, I think, is probably one of the things that a lot of people overlook or don't spend as much time as they should.
Absolutely. That's why we created the retirement budget calculator to put the emphasis on the part that people can actually control, which is how much do you spend, and because we can't control what the market's doing. Okay, well that's great, Fritz. So the next thing I really am fascinated about this the softer side of retirement, which you've spent a lot of time talking about and writing about, and I personally, I'm 48 years old, so I'm just only 10 years behind you. But I find myself getting so restless and bored on weekends. It's like and I know you.
I was with you. I was right there. I was type A. I was hard charging. Yeah, it's a huge adjustment, and that's why you have to spend time thinking about it.
Well,
Absolutely.
I know. So help me here. Help me with what you did. I mean, I know you've taken up some hobbies now. You're involved in this nonprofit where you're helping build fences for dogs. You took up woodworking, but help us create a framework for how do we transition from 30 plus years of work into not working anymore?
That's the question of the hour, Jason. I mean, that really is. And people that struggle with retirement, it's typically in this area that they struggle with. And most people Where you struggle is you fail to appreciate all of the non-financial benefits you're gaining from your work. So what I encourage people to do is take some time and think about all of the non-financial rewards you get from work. You have a social network, you have a sense of identity, you have a purpose, you have objectives, you have structure to your day, all those things. What I encourage people to do is think through each one of those and develop ideas. You'll never know until you actually get there. It's kind of like, when you get married, you don't know what it's going to be like until you're actually married, right? But you can think about it and think about, what things am I going to do? What's my sense of identity going to come from? I was an aluminum guy for 33 years. I'm not an aluminum guy anymore. What am I? Well, now I'm an author. Okay, fine. Come up with answers to each one of those elements, and they can be multiple. And what I encourage people is anything that interests you, like my writing and the blog. I started it not really expecting it to turn into much, and it's turned into one of my major senses of purpose in retirement, and a sense of accomplishment, and identity, a social network. Go on and on. If you look, it's perfectly aligned with all those things that I used to get from work. I can now get from writing. And I get the same thing from the nonprofit work. And I get the same thing for, there's so many things I'm involved with now. But if you look at it from a macro perspective, the really interesting thing is all of the things I'm involved with kind of tie back to that fulfillment of the non-financial benefits that you used to get from work. So my advice is, number one, being aware of it, which you are, is great. And once you get your financials kind of ironed out, you still have a year or so to go to retirement. Really focus that last 12 months while you're still working at starting to develop some of these things that could turn into those purpose type of things. The difficult part of it is the financial side is easy. It's spreadsheets, it's numbers, it's math. The non-financial is very much the other side of the brain. It's that creative, it's that serendipity, and it's not, in my experience, it's not very well structured to, here's the checklist of how you do it. Everybody's got to kind of find their path on their own. But I think the most important thing is be aware of it and think about it and start developing things that you think might become an interest to you, and keep yourself open to continually trying new things. And you'll find it. Everybody does.
2015, when we spoke, you had talked about creating a bucket list for all these different areas of your life. What are top on your bucket list right now? Places you want to go, people you want to be with. You've accomplished a lot in retirement, more than most people. I mean, you're writing books and writing.
It's funny because your natural instinct is to initially go to the travel side. That's just human nature. And I really encourage people to think beyond travel, because travel, it's fun, but you can't travel all the time. I've known numerous people that have gone to full-time traveling in retirement, and within a couple of years they miss the roots of a community. They miss that sense of community. Whatever. There's more to life than just traveling around and seeing things. And I think if I think about the areas that I currently focus on and the areas that I want to really dedicate my time to, what I've found to be the most beneficial are those areas where you can use the skills, talents, and resources that you develop through a life of work and find a way that you can apply those to helping other people. And if you look at the Freedom for Fido that my wife started, it's building free fences for low-income families. What are we doing? We're using our time, our talent. We never knew how to build a fence, but we've learned, right? And that was one of the things we learned in retirement. We've built a whole community of volunteers. We have over 200 volunteers now.
Wow.
And we all have, a dozen people show up at every fence build. So every one of those people, they're also getting a reward in retirement by doing this work to give back to others. And what I've found, I view my writing the same way. My writing is helping other people that are, in a similar demographic or interested in retirement or in that process of transitioning. It's a way for me to use my recently developed ability to write. I used to do corporate emails and stuff, but I found I love to write, and I really enjoy the blog format. So I'm using that skill to help share some of the things that I've learned with people that are following along behind me. So it's that same mindset of using your time, your resources, your skills in a way to help other people is the best avenue I've found to try to target where you start looking for, finding it.
Why do you
and develop your bucket list around that more so than travel?
So travel's not necessarily on top of the bucket list. Helping people is high on your priority list. But I'm curious, why do you think you enjoy writing so much?
Whew, that's a good question. I wrote an article about this, and I had read Stephen King wrote a book about being an author or whatever, and I read it, and it made me think a lot about why do I love writing. And I think the reason I like it's mentally engaging for me. As I'm walking the dogs in the morning, I might get an idea, and maybe I could turn that into a blog post. Mm-hmm. And it keeps you mentally active because you're trying to come up with new ideas to write about. And then it's not only thinking of the ideas, but it's thinking of a way to structure the idea in a way that it's hopefully interesting to read and that other people can apply to their own situations, mm-hmm. which are always going to be different than mine, right? So how do you make it holistic enough that anybody can kind of relate to it? So it's getting the idea, thinking of an interesting way to tell it, and then finding a way to broaden it out where it's as interesting to as many people as you can. And that to me is just, I love a mental challenge. And then the second thing is the actual process of writing itself. I've just found, you always hear about people getting in the zone, athletes or whatever, Michael Jordan, you could just picture the whole court, almost superhuman. When you're in that type of a zone, it's very rewarding, and it's really hard to find areas in your life where you can get into that deep of a zone. Mm. When I'm writing, I'm absolutely in that zone. I can write for hours. Inevitably, I'm out here in my shop now. I built this studio as one of my post-retirement projects. And I can be writing out here for hours. My wife will be calling on the phone because it's 100 feet from the cabin. She'll call and say, "Hey, it's time for lunch." I look, it's 12:30. I missed lunch. Time just flies. And I love really being in that flow and knowing that what I'm writing is going to resonate with people. And then the whole community engagement side and all the comments and responding to the comments and the dialogue. It's fascinating, and it's really it's rewarding work.
I remember reading a post that you wrote about your dad being isolated during COVID, and it really resonated with me because we were in the same position with my mother-in-law at the time. We had just moved her into an assisted living facility in February. Ooh. And then, having to visit her at her window. And it was a challenging time. How do you think that time with your dad and going through COVID, and how has that impacted you or shaped you? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, my dad passed away in February of this year. So, some of his last years were spent in the lockdown environment. And, if I think to what my biggest lesson was, first of all, it breaks your heart, right? Seeing your parents in that type of situation is so heartbreaking, but what's done is done and we can't change the past. I think if you look at how do you apply those lessons to our lives today, to me, the biggest takeaway is, you're never guaranteed your tomorrow. And it's really important, especially in your early years of retirement, when you still have your health, you still have, you can do anything you want to do, how precious those years are and how limited they are, and how important it is to really, take full advantage of them, do the things you've always wanted to do, and savor and be gracious, be thankful. My 10 commandments, one of them was have an attitude of gratitude. Mm-hmm. I would say that's grown even more post-COVID when you see how fleeting, the freedoms that we have really can be.
Yeah. Yeah. When we met and talked back in 2015, the topic of worry came up. And it was funny for me to go back and listen to that interview and hear the things that were the worries of the day. As I was listening to that interview, my dad had shared with me how there was a concern that there was going to be this big earthquake. And there's going to be and then there was, Greece was in the process of failing. And so that was a topic that you had brought up. But talk to me about worry. Because it's something that you get to, you get a front row seat at. When you're retired, you've got a lot of time, and you do have, your worries are maybe a little bit different because now you're depending on these resources, you're depending on this plan. And a lot of this falls on you, Fritz, because you're the money nerd in your family. Your wife isn't into this. So she's kind of dependent on you to make sure that you guys are going to be okay.
Yeah. And worry is an interesting topic. I think, my view, and it's probably overly simplistic, but it's just the approach I've taken and it works well for me. I think so much of the way that we look at life and the things that we think about and how much we worry about things for this specific discussion, it's a lot of it's a matter of choice. You can choose to sit there and worry about everything, or you can choose to just say, okay, I'm going to look at what risks I can identify, let's talk about the sequence of return risk we talked about earlier. Well, what can you do about it? Well, I can build a bucket. I can have 3 years of cash. Okay. Beyond that, there's not much you can do. And I wrote a post about kind of think of a small circle inside of a big circle. And the small circle is the things that you can affect. And the big circle is all the things you can worry about. And it doesn't do you any benefit to think about things outside of that small circle, because those are the things you can affect. So affect what you can affect and get on with living life, and don't focus on the big circle, because there's nothing you can do about it anyway. So it's worked well for me, and I'm surprisingly worry-free. I focus on fitness because I realize as you get older, failing health is potentially a worry. Okay, what can I do about it? Well, I work out 3-4 days a week. I go swimming in the lake. I do spin. I exercise. That's kind of been our approach. Is you think of the things that a lot of people worry about, and instead of focusing on the worst case of what can happen, focus on what can you do to be prepared to minimize the risk of that happening, and make your effort focused on the defensive side, or the offensive side, I guess, rather than the potential risk of everything that could go wrong.
I like that. You wrote a post recently about how retirement is exactly the way you thought it would be and not at all the way that you thought it would be. What were some of the key things you wanted to try to get through in that post?
Yeah, it's impossible to know what the future is going to be like. And I talked earlier about marriage, right? It is a good example. I think having kids is another one. Anybody that's ever had kids, I think they would probably agree, boy, having kids is nothing like I thought it would be, right? At the same time, having kids is probably exactly what you thought it would be. And so to me, and this was written, I think, 3.5 years into retirement, and I was looking back over the 3 years. It was actually in response to a reader comment on a post. And it's interesting when you look at some of the tactical things we've done. I mentioned earlier this workshop. We built a nice big woodworking shop in my writing studio. If you would have asked me 2 months before retirement to list 20 things that we might have done in retirement, this never would have been on the list. This happened entirely serendipitously. We've done a pretty good job of changing our mentality from being a lifelong saver to being free to spend. And with the bucket strategy, we know the amount of cash that's flowing into our checking account is money we can spend. Because we were conservative in all of our estimates, the money that was coming in was less than we were actually spending. Even though we weren't scrimping, we were, just living life and enjoying it. But as that cash begins to grow a little bit, you have a little bit of unexpected income, you write a book, you get paid, whatever. We made a conscious decision that we're going to spend the money. So the things that I didn't expect were really around that, building this workshop that I'm in now. We bought a second home down in Alabama that I never dreamed we would have done. We started the nonprofit, which I always thought I'd do some charitable work, but I never thought we'd be running the thing, right? So the unexpected things were along those lines. But what's interesting is if you look at how it was exactly like I expected it would be, every one of those tactical decisions fit perfectly in some of my broader philosophical approaches to what I wanted my retirement to be. I think finding a way to help others, that was always something I knew I wanted to do. Continuing to learn, that led into the woodworking shop. Having the broad direction and knowing where you want to go is the part that's easier, and that's the part that's been in alignment with what I expected. But the actual tactics of how that gets developed in your retirement is, in our case anyway, been totally unexpected on how those things have evolved.
What brings you joy these days?
Boy, I still love the freedom of retirement. I got to say, 4 years in, I still smile. I wake up, we were joking, today's Monday, right? We went to Kentucky last week and spent some time at Land Between the Lakes. And we came back on Saturday, which we always used to do when we were working, ironically. We'd come back, we'd have Sunday to kind of relax before the work week started. So last night I was joking with my wife. I said, I got to set the alarm clock for 5:30 tomorrow. It's time to get up for work. I still joke about that. So I still love the freedom of retirement. That has not gotten old at all. And I think the biggest, on a macro level, it's having the freedom to do the things with your time that you've identified as being the things that bring you the most satisfaction. And most of that, I would say, is driven around the writing, and even more so around the Freedom for Fido work that we've done. It's so rewarding when you see dogs that have been on their chain for the last 7 years and suddenly they're running free. And we do big fences, right? These fences are, like 300 feet. It's probably not, that's about our average. So you think of like a football field long, it's that much fencing. Wow. So they're big runs. And to see those dogs when they get a run free for the first time, and you see the homeowners who, surprisingly, they're not what you'd kind of stereotypically expect them to be. That's been a surprise. But they're really appreciative because they're trying to do the best by their dog. They just don't have the financial means to do any better. So they keep them chained out so they don't run out. And, they're trying to be responsible, the ones that apply and get into our program. And to see the joy that you can bring to other people's lives is the thing that brings me the most joy right now.
That's good. The Appalachian Mountains, you decided. Now, I think didn't you have a cabin? Did you have a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains?
We did.
Okay.
Yep.
So is that where you moved then, into the cabin, or?
We did. And that's another thing. I talked about the blogging and how that was kind of a little bit of an experiment, and it turned into a pretty big thing for us. The same with a second home. If you've got a second home, look where you are. If you get a second home up in the North Cascades or something, and you just go up there on the weekends, and you find out you love it, hey, that's a little bit of a test run for retirement, right? So we had spent quite a bit of time up here on the weekends. When we moved up here full time, we did actually sell the first cabin, and we bought a second cabin that was a little bit better suited for our needs in retirement. But I think as much joy as we had while we came up here on weekends and vacations, it became a natural place for us to want to spend our lives, and we absolutely love it up here. It's a beautiful, we love the outdoors. We love to hike. We love to kayak. We like to be on the lake. I like to swim, as I mentioned. All those, and this is what I would encourage people when you're thinking about where you want to go in retirement. Before you pick a location, think about what you want your activities and what you want your life to be in retirement, and then pick the location around that. If you want to go to plays all the time and nice fancy restaurants and whatever urban metropolitan type things, fine, stay in the city. But if you want to be outdoors and hiking and mountain biking and doing things that aren't very conducive to do in a city, then let that drive where you want to be. You don't have to be anywhere now for work. You can be wherever you want to go that best fits the lifestyle that you're trying to build for yourself in retirement.
Yeah, that's good. I'm curious to know, with retiring early, as retiring as early as you did, do you find that there are other people that have time that you can go do things with them? I mean, I know you and your wife spend a lot of time together, but do you just have friends that are in a position where you can go do things with them? Or was retiring early, did it put you in a position where you're kind of the Lone Ranger and there weren't a lot of people to hang out with? Or
I've heard from a lot of people that face that. I think one of the unexpected benefits, but a true benefit of moving where we did, is it is a place where a lot of people are retiring, and a lot of people are retiring early. And we were new here, right, full time. So we developed a whole new group of friends. And I mean, we're going out tonight to somebody's birthday party. We're going out tomorrow night with some friends from our church. We go out probably, 3-4 nights a week, or we do Fido builds. We call it the Fido family. We'll just spontaneously, there's a big text chain of all the Fido volunteers, and somebody say, hey, let's go to Grumpy's this afternoon, and boom, 20 people will show up at Grumpy's on an hour's notice. So we've built a network of friends, many of whom are early retirees. We have one that's like a ex-Google millionaire, and they got out in their 30s or whatever, and they're living up here with us, and they're 10 years younger than we are now. So we've been very fortunate in that regard, that the area we chose to move to has been very conducive to building a big network of new friends, all of whom are retired. So we're very fortunate.
Cool. Why buy a second house in Alabama? Why not just do the Airbnb thing or rent short term?
Yeah, we looked at that, and we have an RV, as you know. We came out your way for a summer, and we thought, hey, we'll just take the RV down there. But we couldn't find a RV park that was. First of all, my daughter moved there. That's the big driver. They were up in your area. She was out here,
right? Yeah.
Yeah. They were at Lewis McCord, and they lived on the base there, and they got transferred down to Alabama. So that was the big driver. We knew we were going to be going down there a lot. They have a 3-year-old daughter, our granddaughter. So we wanted to it was a conscious decision that we wanted to spend a lot of time down there. And the reason we chose to do it this way versus an Airbnb is, number one, we wanted to just be able to go whenever we wanted to go, stay as long as we wanted to stay, come back, totally unstructured. If they've got something coming up next week and they want us to come down, great, we'll go down. It's 300 miles away. It's not a big deal. but it's far enough that you can't just drive down and back. And, we didn't want to stay in a hotel. We have dogs. We wanted something that was conducive to life with our dogs. We have 4 dogs. So we take the dogs down with us. We got a little condo that's got a fenced-in backyard that they can go out and play in the yard. So it was really a lifestyle-driven decision. And, fortunately, we're in a position, it's a cheap real estate market. I mean, Southern Alabama is, dirt cheap. So it didn't cost much. And really, if you look at the expenditure for the condo, in my view, that's not really spending. It's just an asset allocation decision. We took something, say, from stocks, because stocks were doing well at the time. We moved it into real estate. Eventually, she'll move, most likely, and then we'll sell the condo, and we'll get, maybe we'll make some money, maybe we won't. Probably make more money than we would have in the stock market now in hindsight, right? Depending on timing. So it was really more, the only added expense of that are the utilities and the taxes, which really is not that, when you compare that cost versus renting an Airbnb for a week every month, turns out it's probably significantly cheaper to have a small place down there. And it gives us the freedom to go whenever we want to go.
Do you ever, when you see places, because I had some folks from Alabama recently that I was talking to, and I was looking at the real estate market down there, and I was looking at prices, and I was like, man, this is unbelievable. Same thing with, same thing with Tennessee. We have some folks that moved to Tennessee recently. I couldn't believe how inexpensive it was to buy a really nice house in Tennessee in continuing care retirement community kind of setting.
Yep.
And do you ever get a wild hair and think, oh man, I need to become a real estate investor and start creating Airbnbs or short-term vacation rentals? Or
No, and I'll tell you, we had that option when I mentioned earlier, when we moved up here full time. We had our weekend cabin, and we decided to change and buy a different place, about the same value. It was just kind of a swap. But we very easily could have kept the first cabin. We had rented it for 3 or 4 or 5 years at that point, while we were preparing for retirement, and it made money for us. So we knew it was going to make money. But we made a conscious decision that, again, decisions in retirement, when you've got financial independence, your decisions don't have to be driven by the financial implications of them, right? So the decision to rent or not to rent, if you take away the financial side of it, it's really of, do you want to be in the business of managing a second home, or do you want to pay a management company to do it for you, just, as a different asset class? Okay, that's fine. But in our case, we just didn't want the hassle. We wanted to simplify things in retirement. And that's why buying the second home was one of the unexpected things in retirement, because we'd already made that decision that we weren't going to own a second home. And then 2 years later, we bought a second home, right? So again, those are the types of things that you don't see coming. But on the straight up decision about, do we want to expand and invest into real estate and become a rental thing? No interest. We just don't want to take our time in retirement. It's not that big of a hassle, but it's enough of a hassle. We just don't want to do it.
Yeah. Because you've been successful with your blog and your book, does that generate any income for you to help you offset the portfolio withdrawals?
Yeah, it does. It does. The book was kind of a one-off. It was a interesting arrangement, but it paid. And the blog, I don't write it to make money, but probably shortly after I retired, for the first 4 years, I never monetized it. I never put ads on it. I hated seeing ads on websites. But once I got into retirement, and I'm like, look, I'm making a conscious decision to invest my time in doing this. And my expenses were starting to grow, because as your blog gets bigger, your back office expenses go up, right? Your mail service, your server, you're taking more server space, so you got to pay more to the service host company, et cetera. And I was like, it's kind of silly to do something that's bringing value to other people and have it cost me money. Yeah. I should at least generate enough revenue to cover my costs and have it be a free hobby. Fortunately, it's done better than that, and I'm making a bit of money. It's basically, I basically write to pay for my health insurance, if you look at it. So basically, my blogging pays for health insurance, which is a nice way to look at it. And none of that, again, because we were conservative, when we were projecting our cash flow, we assumed zero income after retirement. So anything we make obviously has a tremendous impact on your withdrawal rates and everything else. And none of that blog income was expected. So that's a nice bonus. It's not enough to, it's not crazy extra, but it's enough extra that it makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some of these guys, some of the people that I've seen in the FIRE community, financially independent, retired early, they talk a lot about the portfolio withdrawal rates, the 25 times, save 25 times your annual spending, or in your case, 33 times. But it seems like many times those guys have some kind of side gig or side hustle that's helping to supplement their cash flow, whether it's a blog or a podcast or software or something that they built, some kind of, maybe it's rental properties or something that's generating some additional income where they're, it's not just living off of portfolio withdrawals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. It's a cool world we live in. I was actually down in California recently, and I met a woman who was retired, and she was an Uber driver. And I thought, what a cool thing. And anytime you want to just go drive a car, you control the time and the schedule, and you get to meet people, and you just drive them around and drop them off, make a little bit of extra money if you want to have a side gig in retirement. Do you meet very many people in your circle of folks that want that kind of engagement? They want to have some kind of side gig when they're retired?
Yeah. I think the interesting thing when you talk about side gigs and retirement planning and whatnot, the way I've always viewed it is I would much rather be in a situation where, like my blog, okay, it's generating some income, but it's income I wasn't planning for. So I know I can stop at any time when I'm no longer interested in writing, I can stop. I don't need the income. Mm-hmm. It's nice to have, but I'm not dependent on it. Yeah. And I think the danger I would see for somebody that plans an earlier than otherwise retirement, and they're assuming they're going to be, doing a side gig for the next 30 years, and you're dependent on that income because you left your full paying job. Well, what happens if you get 10 years into it and business models are changing faster than ever before? Mm-hmm. What if the thing that you thought would be monetized suddenly isn't making money? Or what if you decide you don't really love to write anymore and you've got to write because you need the income? Mm-hmm. So that's my first answer to your question, is make it where the income is optional, not dependent, and you'll enjoy the side gig a lot more. That said, almost everybody up here that we know that are friends of ours, most of them were like us. They didn't plan any extra income in retirement, and yet I would say well over half of them are generating some income through different things that they didn't expect to happen, right? Doing a little bit of consulting gigs. Somebody's got a little gentleman farm and they do a little bit of, money on the side with their farm, things that they love to do. And that, just like my writing, things that I love to do that just fortunately generate a little bit extra income. That's the way to do a side gig in retirement. Yeah.
Curiosity is one of those characteristics, attributes that's important to you. What are you curious about today?
I'm always curious about stuff. I think to me, curiosity is something that you just need to fertilize like a rose. Every couple of weeks you got to be out there putting fertilizer on it. Every couple of weeks you got to be challenging yourself to look at things that you didn't know about. So it changes all the time for me. What I found is when I was working, you didn't really have the freedom to just go explore something that you kind of like to do, right? So what I found is it's really exciting to just have a little bit of an interest in something and dig into it and see where it goes. I'll probably use woodworking as an example on that. I never really thought I'd get into woodworking, but once Freedom for Fido got going, and there was one of our volunteers who built dog houses, and I was like, man, Tim, that's a huge benefit for Freedom for Fido, but can you build them any faster, right? Because we can't keep up with the demand. And he said, no, but I'll teach you how to do it. So I was like, I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to go out and create a YouTube video, which I didn't really know how to do very well. So I taught myself YouTube video editing, and I went out and I filmed every step in the process. And I decided, well, if I'm going to do this right, I probably ought to, make some blueprints to go along with it. Never made a blueprint in my life. So I just got, Google worksheets out there, and I kind of drew lines and, drew in the numbers for the measurements. Came out pretty good, right? So there's a 13-page blueprint that I developed that shows every single step of the way. Wow. That's complemented with this YouTube video. And I've had people from, all around the world that have sent me pictures of the doghouse they made from my plans and my video. I was like, that's really cool. So I think, and now obviously I'm making doghouses. I built a woodworking shop, and, interestingly, when I'm making doghouses, even now, I still pull up those blueprints that I learned by going to this more experienced guy and learning from him. So, woodworking, I would say, is probably the thing that you can never stop learning about how to do more and more woodworking. So that's probably the area that I'm pursuing most of the curiosity in right now. I love it. I really enjoy it.
That's cool. And you're entrepreneurial in the sense that when you enjoy something, it's fun to go create around it. And I have a friend that is doing that in the woodworking space. So he has a YouTube channel that he created as a result of just enjoying being in that space, and it's kind of neat to see that growing. So wouldn't surprise me one bit if it went from the retirement manifesto to the woodworking manifesto with Fritz Gilbert.
Well, it's funny because that's an area where you talked about side hustles, side gigs. I could easily turn my YouTube channel into something that's probably significantly more. It generates a lot more cash than the writing does. YouTube's a very profitable venue right now. But I don't want to, because it takes a lot of time to create the videos. My goal right now is to do less screen time, not more. I want to be outside. I don't want to be staring at electrons all day, right? So I've made it conscious. I struggle to write, and I've actually backed down my writing frequency. I used to write every week. For 6 years, I wrote every week.
Wow.
And I wrote an article earlier this year about the pebble in the pond. And I talked about how you throw a pebble in the pond and it makes a wave. And, can you just perpetually throw pebbles in the pond, or does it get to be, where you want to do things besides throwing pebbles, right? Even though the waves are making a bigger impact, blah, blah, blah. All that to say, there are always things you can do. I could grow a YouTube channel, no doubt about it in my mind, but I don't want to. And again, when you've reached financial independence, your decisions are no longer driven by the financial implications. So it's a beautiful place to be. And if the market continues to tank and it's, the worst bear market since the Depression, well, you know what? I'll start a YouTube channel. If I suddenly need money, I know I can always turn some of those levers and see what happens with them. So it's that helps to reduce that worry as well, when you know that there are other things you could do out there to generate revenue if you had to.
How is your wife doing with retirement, and how has that relationship evolved now that you guys are retired?
Yeah, that's huge topic, Jason, and I thank you for bringing it up. It was an interesting transition. I think we made the same mistake that a lot of people make, where we thought we understood. I'm the one leaving the workplace, but it's going to be just as big a change for her as it is for me. I'd done a lot of articles about that pre-retirement. But the reality of what happened is I retired in July, and my wife's mother passed in September. And she had Alzheimer's. She actually lived with us for 4 years. And my wife was essentially giving her full-time care for a lot of those years. She ended up going into a nursing home, but it was local. My wife was in there 5 days a week. And in hindsight, we recognized that was kind of my wife's purpose, right? That was one of that was her job for many years. And it ended when her mom died. And it was kind of like somebody gets fired from a job unexpectedly. I mean, she's going to pass, but you don't know when. And you don't realize the significance and how much value in your life you were getting from taking care of your mom. So whereas I had done all this planning and all this preparation, hers was more of a cliff. Suddenly her mom was gone. And a couple of months later, she's kind of like, you could tell she was just adrift and trying to figure out what she was going to do. And it was a retirement transition. But not one that you would intuitively sense, on the forefront. But now, looking back 4 years later, she went through a similar path that most people do, and she was kind of trying to find out what her purpose is going to be, and how she's going to make a difference in the world. And since she came upon this, Freedom for Fido idea, which again, pursue your curiosity. She saw a YouTube video from Mike Rowe. He was profiling actually out in your way, Portland, Freedom Fences for Fido, which was doing exactly what we're doing, but they were doing it out in Seattle or Portland area. And she said, we should do that here. And I said, yeah, we should. Let's look into it. So she started a 501c3. She got a board of directors. She's put in the bylaws. She's got the IRS certification, and it's turned into this huge thing.
Wow.
That she absolutely loves. She's having the best years of her life. I'm having the best years of my life.
Wow.
Her journey to get here was different than mine, but we both ended up in the same place.
Tell me about that, the nonprofit and the fences that you guys are building. Why has that been so successful? Why is it so rewarding? Why are there so many people that want to get involved in that mission?
I think the biggest thing is, again, settling where we decided to settle. We are in the Appalachian Mountains, and this is a growing, affluent retirement community, but there's a huge remnant of the old Appalachia, right? It's a bimodal population. You've got people that have been here for generations that live up in the hollers and back in the valleys, and their their granddaddies made moonshine, right? There's a huge element of impoverished people that have, there's not a lot of industry in this area. It's tourism based, service industry, but those aren't good paying jobs. So there's a lot of people that are struggling to get by. At the same time, there's a lot of people that just happen to be moving into this area that have time on their hand. They have financial resources. They're looking for their purpose in retirement. And it's just the perfect combination of a need, a community in need, and a community of people looking to find a way to fill needs. And the overlap it's beautiful. It brings the bimodal distribution of the population. It kind of brings them together. And I think when people move up here, and they're not used to that Appalachia lifestyle, and they see the dogs on chains, it breaks people's hearts, right? Nobody likes to see a dog on chain. So people they really hate seeing dogs on chains, but it's not illegal. I mean, there's nothing, you can't call the police, you can't call animal control. So what do you do about it? There's nothing you can do about it until Freedom for Fido came along. So it's a perfect way for people to give back to the community and address a need that most people really struggle to see, which is dogs on chains.
Yeah, I love that. I was talking to a guy recently, and he said that his brother had gotten really involved in building a nonprofit, and their motto is "See a need, fill a need." And it's just as simple as that. It's not hard to look around and see that there's a lot of need. It does push people out of their comfort zone to fill a need. And so oftentimes people want to get involved with an organization. In your case, you guys said, hey, we need to start something. This doesn't exist here, and we need to go start it. I love that.
Yep.
Fritz, I think it's so cool that we get to reconnect after 7 years. I couldn't believe it was 2015 that we originally had this conversation. And
I know, that's great. And you had the bucket strategy, and you mentioned my articles on it, and I'll send him a note. So for those listening, I just sent Jason an email last week and said, hey Jason, been a long time since we've talked. Let's catch up. He goes, hey, why don't you come on the show? We'll catch up 7 years after the fact. It's shocking that it's been that long. I've continued to watch and listen to what you're doing. I love it. Your retirement budget calculator has done very, very well for you, and your content continues to be first class. So I think it's great that we're both serving the same needs, and that we got to reconnect.
I do too. Just leave us with two thoughts, one on finance and one on non-finance when it comes to retirement planning. If there were just two things that you could share with our listeners, the two most important things on the financial side and then the non-financial side.
Okay. Financial, take the time to get it right before you retire, and you'll be surprised by how little you think about it after you retire.
Cool.
So don't think that's going to be your big obsession in retirement. It won't be. I would almost guarantee it. On the non-financial, it's almost exactly the opposite. My biggest takeaway on the non-financial would be, if you're not yet retired, you're not going to believe me when I say this, but the non-financial areas of your life are going to be more important after you retire than the financial side. And don't underestimate the importance of planning for them and figuring out how to make that successful transition, because that's what leads to a great retirement.
My father-in-law was really into golf. He was a big golfer. And a couple of months ago, Fritz, somebody introduced me to pickleball. Have you played pickleball?
Yeah, I have. Yep.
Oh man, I love that sport.
Yeah, big. There's a reason it's the number one growing sport. Yeah, it's huge.
So much fun. But I hurt my back yesterday. I've hurt myself several times playing pickleball. But now I can see that, at least in retirement. I've got that hobby. And then electric bikes, riding electric bikes. Do you have an electric bike?
Man, you hit on a hot point, Jason. I'm on the brink right now. There's great mountain biking trails around here, but they're like $7,000, and I'm still cheap, right? And I'm like, I can afford $7,000 for a good dirt bike. Just get it. I don't ride enough to justify it. So right now I have not yet made the plunge, but everybody I've said is ride one. You will buy it and you'll never regret it. So maybe next time we talk, I'll have an electric bike, but right now I don't.
Well, those two are my favorite things right now when I'm not working, is my electric bike and pickleball. So
you don't feel like you're cheating when you ride an electric bike?
I do feel like I'm cheating, and I've had people tell me that, and I'm okay with it. It's just so enjoyable. It's one of those things that actually, those two things bring me joy right now. And so It's good.
You're tempting me because I'm getting to the point. I'm 59. I'm still in decent shape, but man, you hit some of these mountain climbs on these trails, and I'll admit it. There's times I have to get off and push. I mean, these are steep hills. You get down in your granny gear and you're going for 1,000 yards straight up this mountainside, and you are just dogging it. Man, if I could just kind of flip that switch and get that 2x multiplier, however those things work, that would be kind of nice. So I'm probably leaning that way. So.
Fritz, you've got a great personality. You're doing really good work. It's really impacting a lot of people. Your work is cited all over the place. It's so fun for me to hear Fritz Gilbert's name mentioned, because I think to myself, I remember I talked to Fritz when he was just getting started. So thank you for helping people and all the work that you're doing. This is awesome.
Well,
man.
And thanks for having me on and profiling some of my work. I really do appreciate it. We're meeting the same need, and we've always gotten along well. So I really appreciate you having me back on today.
Well, and my invitation's still open. If you ever make it out this way, let me take you for a hike or take you fishing or something. It would be fun.
Right, we'll do that. We'll do that.
Thanks, Fritz.
Take care, Jason.
Information and opinions expressed here are believed to be accurate and complete, for general information only, and should not be construed as specific tax, legal, or financial advice for any individual, and does not constitute a solicitation for any securities or insurance products. Please consult with your financial professional before taking action on anything discussed in this program. Parker Financial, its representatives, or its affiliates have no liability for investment decisions or other actions taken or made by you based on the information provided in this program. All insurance-related discussions are subject to the claims-paying ability of the company. Investing involves risk. Jason Parker is the president of Parker Financial, an independent, fee-based wealth management firm located at 9057 Washington Avenue Northwest, Silverdale, Washington. For additional information, call 1-800-514-5046 or visit us online at soundretirementplanning.com.